Week 28, Overview, Shaping Influences on Colonial Culture. So, welcome to Unit 4. We're going into a critical period, 1750 or so to 1800. We call this unit the Age of Revolutions because we'll be focused on two major revolutionary movements that gave birth to new republics in America and in France. We'll touch on the start of another revolution, the Industrial Revolution, as we look at the steam engine this unit. Because we've been studying the histories of the colonies and the European nations who sponsored them, older students will be able to compare and contrast the American and French revolutions. All students will be looking at conditions in and out of America this week. Rhetoric students are reading about Europe and America, looking at the social and cultural conditions in the colonies plus society back in Europe in the middle 18th century. Younger students will read about conditions outside Europe, studying America and other colonies around the globe. Most weeks, Tapestry of Grace has specific readings which are closely tied to our outlines for discussion. This week, many children will take a different tack. We are encouraging each child to pick out some specific area that interests them about the colonies to present a report on. Is your child especially interested in Indians, horses, weapons, science? Take an interest in whatever your child picks this week to encourage him or her to really dig into this topic. While your kids are doing their mini report, let's take a look at the big picture. What were the various countries of the world like on the eve of the great revolutions that gave birth to the American and French republics? This was an era of powerful monarchs. In 1753, Prussia was ruled by Frederick the Great. George II was King of Great Britain, which included England, Wales, and Scotland. He also ruled Ireland. George was the last British king to lead troops into battle personally. Not all the monarchs were great, though. Louis XV had all the powers of an absolute ruler, but he was a remarkably weak king. Not all the monarchs were men, either. In Russia, Peter the Great had died, and his daughter Elizabeth ruled. Within 10 years, Catherine the Great would take that throne. Maria Theresa reigned over Austria-Hungary. Her youngest daughter, one of 16 children, Marie Antoinette, married the next king of France in 1775. We'll see what happened to her in a few weeks. Europeans were still extending their influence around the world. In 1750, much of India was ruled by the powerful Mughal Empire. Mughal is the Persian name for Mongol. The Mughals were Muslim descendants of the Mongols who invaded and conquered Persia, and they ruled much of what is now Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan. An incident in 1756 helped trigger a wave of European anger at these barbarians. In 1756, Mughal forces overwhelmed a British fort in Calcutta. Englishmen were horrified to hear that the victorious Mughals had crammed 146 British and Indian prisoners of war into a single room that measured 14 by 18 feet. The heat in India was already intense without all those human bodies packed together. According to one survivor's account, 123 of the 146 prisoners suffocated that night. England called it the Black Hole of Calcutta. Later research suggests that the story the English heard about this incident was wildly exaggerated. The facts didn't change the way they reacted, though. The British East India Company effectively took control of most of India. They broke the power of the Mughal dynasty at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Robert Clive, an East India Company agent, led the troops. This battle marked the beginning of a long occupation of India by the British. India did not govern itself again until 1947. India wasn't the only hot spot. There were tensions between European traders and the Chinese emperors of the Qin dynasty. Students who have read George Washington's World will know that the Qianlong emperor closed China to European traders. China's only contact with European commerce was at the outer wharfs of one city, Guangzhou. English people called it Canton. This was partially a function of the isolationist attitude that the Chinese had always maintained, and partially a feeling that the Chinese did not need the goods that Europeans had to offer, and partially a move to protect traditional Chinese culture. The Europeans responded by concentrating on the one commodity the Chinese really seemed to want, opium, a powerful narcotic. It would seem they purposefully sought to addict the Chinese to this drug, and to continue to supply the addiction as a means to profit. That's troubling. But let's return to the American colonies. At the close of Unit 3, we began to study the Great Awakening with a focus on Jonathan Edwards in New England. This week, older students will learn more about the other two major figures of the Awakening, George Whitefield and John Wesley. God used the complementary ministries of these two men to change both America and Britain. Thousands were converted as a result of their preaching. Their message of a God who actively intervenes in the affairs of men slowed the growth of deism, which taught of a God who created the universe and its laws, wound it up like a watch, and then left things to run themselves. Their ministry led to lasting works of charity and education and a new Protestant denomination. The Great Awakening left Americans more united and less focused on individual self-interest. These were factors that proved critical in the American Revolution. The Church of England, in that age of reason, was a measured, polite place where intense devotion to religious duty seemed quaint at best. Many people put more faith in the new discoveries of science than the ancient message of Scripture. Many hearts had grown cold. Not so the Wesleys, however. In 1725, John Wesley read a book called Christian Perfection and the Serious Call, which gave him a higher view of God's law. He resolved to keep it, inwardly and outwardly, as sacredly as possible. At Oxford University, in 1729, he and his brother Charles formed a holy club of young men who dedicated themselves to the methodical pursuit of a righteous life. Their peers mocked them as Methodists, and the name has stuck to the present day. 6 years later, John Wesley went to Savannah, Georgia, intending to convert the Indians and call the colonists to a deeper life with God. On the voyage across the Atlantic, Wesley was impressed by the Moravians on board. The Moravians were spiritual descendants of John Hus, who was executed in what is now the Czech Republic before the time of Martin Luther. During a terrifying storm which snapped a mast right off the ship, Wesley was amazed to see the Moravians calmly singing hymns to God. In Georgia, Wesley set up the world's first Sunday school. Unfortunately, John's time in Georgia had its difficulties, and he sailed back to England a discouraged man. That could have been the end of the story, but he found a group of Moravians back in London. At a Moravian meeting in 1738, Wesley felt his heart strangely warmed as he heard the Moravians read from Martin Luther's preface to his epistle to the Romans. Wesley entered into a personal and abiding relationship with Christ. Just weeks later, he began to preach remarkable sermons on salvation by personal faith and God's free grace for all. That same year, young George Whitefield went to Savannah. He had been a member of the Holy Club at Oxford, who had been profoundly changed by reading a book called The Life of God in the Soul of Man. In Georgia, Whitefield preached a series of revival meetings. The next year, 1739, he preached almost every day to large crowds as he traveled through the colonies. Whitefield's preaching didn't fit the Anglican mold. It was extemporaneous and emotional. He presented no scholarly appearance. There were no notes in front of him. He didn't spend hours in sermon preparations, and he was not supported by any established church, although he remained a member of the Anglican Church all his life. Thus, he was disliked and distrusted by those who put their confidence in church hierarchies. When he came back to England, it wasn't long before Anglican ministers refused to let him use their pulpits. That didn't stop Whitefield. He just preached in the open air, to anybody who would listen. And people did listen. First hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands came to hear this man on fire. His style and the content of his message spoke directly to the common man, and it was mostly common people, including many slaves, who responded to his message concerning their danger through sin and the availability of grace through faith in Jesus Christ. The black American poetess, Phyllis Wheatley, wrote a poem at Whitefield's death. Here was the message of Jesus that she heard from Whitefield. Take him, ye wretched, for your only good. Take him, ye starving sinners, for your food. Take him, my dear Americans, he said. Be your complaints on his kind bosom laid. Take him, ye Africans, he longs for you. Impartial Savior is his title due. Washed in the fountain of redeeming blood, ye shall be sons and kings and priests to God. Whitefield and the Wesleys agreed about the mission of preaching the gospel to the masses, but they disagreed on some major doctrines. Whitefield was a thoroughgoing Calvinist, who believed that a sovereign God elected sinners who were so corrupted by sin that they could never turn to him without his help. The Wesleys were Arminians, who saw this as consigning people to hell without ever giving them a chance at salvation. This debate between predestination and free will has been running strong for the last 5 centuries, but it didn't keep Whitefield and the Wesleys from working together in the Great Awakening. The Wesleys had enormous gifts. Charles Wesley published 5,500 hymns and wrote words to another 2,000. His hits include Christ the Lord is risen today, Hark the herald angels sing, Love divine all loves excelling, and Oh for 1,000 tongues to sing. John Wesley's gift of administration led to the eventual formation of the Methodist Church, which sent circuit-riding preachers across America to bring the church to the wildest parts of the frontier. The Great Awakening left lasting fruits in England and in America. In England, the revival's emphasis on lost souls and direct ministry to the poor prepared people for the social changes that would come with the Industrial Revolution. Methodist leaders cared about social justice. John Howard, a sheriff and concerned Christian in England, tried to alleviate suffering in English prisons. Other Christians joined together to combat gambling, dueling, child labor, drunkenness, and pornography. Many gave food and clothing to poor people in their areas. Medical attention was given to the sick. Christians provided legal aid to the poor. Some provided housing for widows and orphans. At the same time, the Methodists taught the poor that honest labor pleased God. Many poor converts turned from destructive vices like gambling and alcoholism and worked with their own hands. Hard work and clean living paid off. Many of these Methodist converts earned enough to enable their children to enter the middle class, and many of their children became quite wealthy. Some historians say the Great Awakening saved England from a violent upheaval like the French Revolution by allowing social conditions to improve without bloodshed. In the colonies, awakened Christians who wanted to spread the gospel realized how important education was. There were missionaries and ministers to be trained, but there was also a sense that everybody needed to grow in knowledge and godly wisdom. Before 1735, most men went to England for training. The Great Awakening resulted in the founding of a host of colleges, among them such well-known names as Dartmouth's, Princeton, Rutgers, and Brown. There's something sobering about that list of famous names. Jonathan Edwards, who triggered the Great Awakening, was called to serve as president of Princeton. What would Princeton think of Edwards now? Poor Methodist converts gave up their vices and worked hard to the glory of God. Their children reaped the material benefits of this change, and many of their grandchildren were wealthy by this world's measure. Perhaps that's one reason England never had the kind of violent revolution France did. The Great Awakening was a deeper kind of revolution. In America, the Great Awakening broke down barriers between colonies and colonists. It was a significant social movement that helped to build the unity that helped to change the 13 colonies into the United States.